How's everyone doing? Are we all staying safe at this unusual time we find ourselves in? The planet may be closed, but life goes on, and what better way to pass the time than having a random Scottish guy with an evil fish as a persona tell you a tale. Tonight we've got an original story from none other than yours truly. It's a little rough around the edges, but don't let that put you off. I think as a species we've developed a deep primal unease towards large deep bodies of water, and since our planet is mostly made up of the wet stuff, I think that's understandable. There's just something disconcerting about not knowing what's below us or even how far down it goes. I enjoy the sea normally, but when I'm walking down a gentle sand-covered embankment by the shore, there's always that thought in the back of my head that I could hit a sea shelf and suddenly there's nothing beneath my feet. I don't know about you, but that's the stuff of nightmares for me. Anyway, enough of me revealing my deep, dark insecurities. Let's just get on with the story. So get yourself a nice hot drink, turn off the lights, and get comfy while I tell you a story. A few months ago, I left my dream job. It's something I never thought I'd do. This was supposed to be a career until the day I retired. Now everything has changed. Ever since I was in school, which is going back almost 20 years now, I knew what I wanted to do when I was older. While my friends and classmates all chose fairly normal vocations such as doctors or dentists, I felt a deep desire to work at sea. I didn't know or care so much how I ended up there, but I just felt a connection with the vast bodies of water that surround our planet. I settled in the Navy originally, thinking that it would be the perfect way to get out into the great unknown. I even went as far as going to the recruitment office and speaking with an enthusiastic member of staff. I was told of the places I would visit, the experiences I would have, and the qualifications that I would ultimately end up with. It certainly sounded like the perfect solution, and I would have signed up there and then were it not for the fact I wasn't quite old enough to join. Instead, I made a pact with myself that as soon as I left school, this would be the path that I would follow. Over the following months, I studied hard, determined to secure the grades I'd require for my upcoming career, and then purely by chance, another opportunity fell into my lap. I should have probably mentioned before now, but I lived on a remote Scottish island, which is perhaps where my fascination for the sea was born. The island community that I belonged to had primarily two main sources of employment. You either worked in the oil sector or the fishing industry. Every other business on the island was designed to support or benefit from one of these two. One seemingly innocuous day, I was round at a friend's house after school playing a new video game his parents had bought for him. His father had come in to check if we wanted a drink, and we had got talking. I discovered he was a fisherman, and when I expressed my desire to work at sea, he seemed genuinely interested. I went on to tell him of my visit to the Navy Careers Office, and he agreed that it was indeed a potentially good choice for my future. He then asked me a question, the answer to which I hadn't even considered before now. Have you ever been out in the water? Some folk suffer from terrible, crippling seasickness when they're out there. I must admit that I felt a bit foolish having to admit that the thought hadn't even crossed my mind. I think my embarrassment was obvious as my face flushed and he gave me a sympathetic look. I'll tell you what, come back and see me tomorrow and I'll see if I can get you out in the boat with us for a while. You'll need to make sure it's alright with your parents first though. I remember hurrying home and excitedly explaining this proposition to my parents, who after some convincing agreed to let me go. Within a couple of weeks, I was packing a bag for a 3-day trip at sea. The day finally arrived, and as I stood there asking for permission to come aboard, I knew this was where I belonged. I was completely green, but the captain would give me some simple tasks to carry out so that I could get a feel for working on the waves while not being completely useless. And so began my love affair with the seas and oceans of the world. The Navy plan was swiftly abandoned in favour of the smaller, more tight-knit environments of fishing boats. Work was gruelling, but the wages made it all worthwhile. I forged strong friendships with my crewmates, and it seemed I had found a career for life. I would go on to spend the next 20 years working aboard a variety of vessels of varying sizes and styles. Some were large and modern, while others had been in service for decades and were so cramped you would be living on top of one another at all times. The only time you'd ever be alone with your thoughts would be when you were sat in a tiny toilet cubicle. Crude, I know, but that's the truth. As vast and seemingly empty as the waters are, you rarely feel alone out there. A decent crew are like your second family, and you'll often spend more time with these people than your partner and children. It's a unique bond you share, born from your time on the waves working together. You quickly form lasting friendships with these people once you realise more often than not that your very life itself is dependent on them. Unfortunately, like any walk in life, you'll always get the odd bad egg. Someone that just isn't wired quite right and seems to make your life that little bit more difficult simply by existing. In most land-based jobs, it's usually just a case of keeping your distance and ignoring them. This can be a little more tricky at sea when you're all cramped in a cabin, barely an arm's length away from each other. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, I need to explain what led me to making the decision to never return to the water. 6 months ago, I was on a small vessel with a crew of 7 other men. Most of us had worked together for a while, and our voyages were like a well-oiled machine. We worked efficiently, and there were rarely any tensions on board. Our captain was an experienced, stereotypical grizzled man, having spent more decades than I can imagine out in the vast blue wilderness. His white beard and rough wrinkled skin told of 1,000 adventures in the most remote parts of the earth. It was a good crew, and we were looking to earn a healthy wage packet upon our return to dry land. All in all, it should have been a standard trip, one we had done many, many times before. The only thing that made this trip slightly different was a late addition to the crew. Damien was a relatively inexperienced young man, early 20s, and knows it all. I'm sure you know the type. He had only been out once before with another crew, and for all intents and purposes was as green as a summer's tree. He was the nephew of the captain's wife, and I suspect this is the only reason he had found himself amongst our numbers on that day, taking the spot away from another more experienced crewman, no doubt. It wasn't the end of the world though. We were all new at some point, and learning the ropes had to start somewhere. He was immediately assigned to the menial jobs on board that none of us liked doing. This may sound unfair, but we had all had to do that in our early days. This is just one of the unwritten rules when you work aboard a vessel. Everyone must serve their time and earn their position. Experience matters when you're out on the waves, hundreds, if not thousands of miles from help if something were to go wrong. This particular trip was scheduled for 2 weeks, with our fishing grounds being located roughly 200 miles west of the Shetland Isles in the Atlantic Ocean. I won't bore you with the maritime laws surrounding fishing, but suffice to say the rules are strict. You have quotas that cannot be exceeded, areas you cannot go, and a million other regulations that you must adhere to or face a wage-destroying fine. The first few days passed without incident. We worked hard, ate in the evening, and grabbed what little sleep we could until it was time to go to work once more. Damien seemed to adapt well to his new surroundings and assigned duties at first. He was diligent and remained focused on the job at hand. Sadly, this would not last, and by day 4 he had begun to grow complacent and unfocused. Where before he would make great effort to keep pace with the rest of us, he now began to slow down. He would randomly abandon his duties, more interested in what others were doing, and loudly complaining that he had been lumbered with the worst jobs. How the crew should all take turns doing the various duties on board and share the burden. This went down with the crew about as well as you'd probably imagine it did. Now, when I said we were like a well-oiled machine before, this was entirely dependent on everyone doing their part. As soon as one cog stops working, it throws everything else out of sync. Damien was the wobbly cog in this metaphor. We would all regularly direct him back to his post, explaining over and over that every time he abandoned his post, it was costing the operation money and directly affecting his own wage. Sadly, this would fall on deaf ears most of the time, and I could see tensions beginning to rise with the rest of the crew. There are few things worse than tensions on a small fishing vessel. The tight conditions and long work hours magnify even the smallest of issues, and by day 7 we were all at breaking point. The captain took Damien aside and sternly warned him that his disruptive behaviour wouldn't be tolerated and his career at sea would be short-lived if he didn't fall in line. This seemed to do the trick, for a while at least. Before I continue, there's something you need to understand about a fishing vessel, or any working boats and ships at sea. There are a lot of dangerous moving parts in operation at all times. When working around this machinery, you have to be constantly vigilant. Provided you show the equipment respect, it will work for you and not against you. Even the smallest lapse in concentration can end in disaster. I've seen fingers sliced off in the blink of an eye, feet crushed for simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the obvious one, people knocked overboard into the icy cold waters. Thankfully, as horrible as these accidents could be, we had not lost any souls up to this point. At this point, we had 4 days left at sea before returning with our bountiful haul. It had been a productive yet difficult trip, thanks mainly to the disruptive addition to our crew. Still, the end was in sight and spirits seemed to be lifting as the thought of returning home to a warm bed and the embrace of loved ones were almost within touching distance. We just had to get through those last 4 days. Damien decided this would be a good time to ramp up the annoyance level and all but abandon the duties he had been assigned to. His complete lack of respect for the workings of the vessel were on show for all to see. One of our crew was a large, intimidating looking Spaniard called Jorge. We simply referred to him as Jojo, and despite his menacing size, he was actually a gentle, well-mannered man. We had worked together several times over the years and I'd rarely seen him so much as raise his voice in anger to anyone. That was until our newest crewman decided to take issue with the big man. A key part of the loading process involves a large mechanised crane and winch. It's a noisy, dirty and dangerous job as multi-ton hauls of fish are brought aboard throughout the day. Jojo was in charge of this very important part of the operation and he took his job very seriously, constantly conscious and vigilant to the dangers involved. It was around 0700 and we were all on deck carrying out various roles as the icy Atlantic spray soaked us with each crashing wave. The sun had not yet risen over the horizon, although you could see daybreak wasn't far off. At least when daylight breaks it seems a little warmer, even if in reality it isn't at all. Damien had been late rising from his bunk and as a result of this had missed breakfast. Maybe this was why he decided to start an argument with Jojo, who knows. Tired and cold though, this was possibly the worst time for him to pick a fight. I missed the start of the altercation. The first I knew of there being a problem was when I heard Jojo raise his voice. Over the years, I'd only seen him angry a handful of times, and you knew when he was annoyed because he'd revert to his native Spanish tongue. As I became aware of what was happening, I looked across the deck to see Jojo towering above Damien, his face red with anger as he gestured for the smaller man to leave him alone. Go! Just go! A tu maldito trabajo! Do your fucking job. Considering the difference in size, Damien seemed unfazed, filled with his own arrogant self-importance as he puffed out his chest and attempted to make himself seem larger than he was. I sighed, exchanging glances with my other crewmen before I began to make my way over to defuse the situation. What happened next went down so quickly I barely even had time to react. Damien exploded with rage, pushing Jojo, his enormous frame barely even moving. The big man looked at him for a moment and burst out laughing at his pitiful attempt. This only seemed to anger Damien further, his small wiry arms suddenly swinging wildly as he attempted to land a blow while Jojo did his best to avoid him. I can say hand on heart that the big Spaniard never once attempted to physically retaliate. During this one-sided melee, Damien lost his footing on the wet slippery deck. As he began to fall, he thrust his arms out desperately trying to grab something, anything that would keep him upright. In a case of Jonah levels of terrible luck, his hand found the control levers for the crane. Before Jojo could react, Damien had pulled down hard, which caused the large boom arm to lurch wildly across the deck. Prior to this nonsense, I had been in the middle of hooking the windshield when I had been forced to leave my post to deal with the fight. As a result of this, a large iron chain had been left untethered and was now whipping dangerously over all of our heads. Damien, completely oblivious to the hazard he had just caused, didn't see what was approaching him at a high rate of speed. I called out to try and warn him, but to no avail. By the time he had regained his footing, it was too late. He was violently hit by the runaway chain. His body crumpled in an instant as he was lifted off of his feet. He looked like a small toy a dog would play with as he was launched towards the edge of the vessel, appearing entirely weightless. I don't think he even had time to scream as the air was knocked from his lungs, and in a brief moment he was gone, overboard into the cold waters that surrounded us. We all immediately jumped into action. A man overboard is a matter of life and death, and every second counts. The alarm was sounded and a lifebelt was sent flying into the waters below. Damien landed around 10 metres from the vessel, his body rising and falling beneath the waves, illuminated only by the search lamps. The scene was chaotic. Crew members were shouting and darting around as the captain attempted to turn the boat in spite of the rough conditions. For anyone with a basic understanding of the physics of a boat, you will be aware that having your vessel port or starboard against a turbulent swell can be dangerous. It's always far more stable to face the waves head on unless absolutely necessary. This was an emergency though, and the risk to life justified the dangerous manoeuvre. As soon as we began the turn, I instantly felt the boat lurch violently and was forced to brace myself. I was struggling to keep eyes on Damien, his body having now drifted to around 20 metres from our position. He didn't appear to be moving, and I knew we were running out of time. While drowning was a very real concern, there is a secondary danger that many wouldn't even consider. The average water temperature for our particular location was a bone-chilling 1 degree Celsius, or 33 degrees Fahrenheit if you preferred that method of measurement. The initial shock of hitting water that cold can send the body into shock, and prolonged exposure will quickly cause the shutdown of your vital organs. Damien had now been in the water for around 2 minutes, and time was fast running out. While conditions had been rough prior to him going overboard, it now seemed like they had worsened. The waves were cresting higher, the wind had picked up to a howl, and the vessel was being thrown around like it weighed absolutely nothing. Finally, we were oriented correctly, and the boat engine roared as we charged towards our fallen crewman. I stood motionless, my eyes on Damien. 15 metres in closing. 10 metres. 7 metres. 5. 3. All stop. Another life ring and guide rope was tossed towards the motionless body. He made no attempt to reach for them, his unconscious body bobbing and dipping on the water's surface. Jojo was leaning over the side, braced by the rest of the crew as he tried desperately to reach the lost soul. It still wasn't enough, and we were going to lose him. I knew what needed to be done. I double-checked my life jacket and took a deep breath. My heart was racing and I felt like I was going to be sick. "I'm going in for him," I screamed as loud as I could. The men looked back at me, fear and panic in their eyes before nodding solemnly. I'm not a religious man, but I won't lie. I said a little prayer before I left the relative safety of that deck. Without allowing myself any more time to talk myself out of it, I swung my legs over the side, and with one final gulp of air, I pushed myself forward. Although I knew what to expect, and have had numerous hours of survival training for the exact situation, nothing quite prepares you for the moment you hit the icy cold water. The air was expelled from my lungs instantly as I disappeared beneath the surface. Panic and disorientation set in straight away as I kicked and swam as hard as I could to get my head above the water. A strange thing happens when you're submerged in near complete darkness. It's suddenly very difficult to get your bearings, and something so basic as up is no longer a simple direction to ascertain. The thought briefly entered my mind that I might even be swimming downwards towards certain death. My fears quickly allayed as I caught a glimpse of the searchlight on the surface as the crew scanned for me. I was likely only beneath the water for a mere moments, but to me it felt so much longer. I broke through the water into the chilly morning's air, gasping for breath and internally thanking any greater power that may have been listening for keeping an eye on me down there. Now that I was alive, I cast my eyes towards the shape bobbing on the water a few metres from me. The clock was ticking, and we both needed to get out of here right now. My muscles ached as I began to swim towards Damien. I knew there was a very real chance I was about to be a corpse, but whether or not that was the case, I would not leave a man behind. After what felt like an age, I was within grasping distance of him. I wrapped my now numb fingers around his neck of the bright orange life jacket and pulled with all my might. Damien! Damien, can you hear me? Fuck, Damien, come on buddy, you have to help me here. I screamed, my voice barely audible over the crashing waves that battered us both. Damien was facing away from me, and I remember wanting to check on him, but I was struggling to keep a grip of his jacket while staying afloat. I'd get him on board first, and then we would do what needed to be done. In my peripheral vision, I saw another guideline thrown by the crew with a ring attached. I desperately grabbed for it with my free hand, my head briefly dipping into the icy waters once more. With Damien in one hand and the ring in the other, I turned my attention back toward my stricken crewman. I will never forget what I saw in the following moments for as long as I live. Damien was now looking right at me, his eyes wide with fear. He was trying to say something, but no sound was coming from his mouth. I've got you, pal. Just hang in there. I'm not going to let you go. Just hang in there. He didn't react to my words at all. His expression frozen, eyes still wide and unblinking, mouth moving as he tried to force words out. I pulled with all of my strength as I tried to bring Damien and the life ring together. He felt unnaturally heavy, his body refusing to shift even a little despite my straining muscles. Something felt very wrong here. I couldn't work out why. At that moment, the sun began to appear over the distant horizon, light slowly filling the vast emptiness of the ocean around us. The crew released more line and I pulled the ring to Damien's side. I began to wrap my legs around his body, the extra buoyancy from the ring allowing me to briefly stop kicking. It was at this exact moment that two things happened that I cannot explain. With roughly 12,000 feet of empty, desolate abyss below me, I did not expect to meet any solid resistance as I wrapped myself around Damien, yet that's exactly what happened. I made contact with something solid. It felt like concrete, and I winced as I felt the flesh of my shin tear. At this very moment, Damien's expression changed to one of absolute terror, and he opened his mouth to speak once more. It won't let me go. You have to get out of here. Now. His voice was clear and calm. The cacophony of the waves crashing seemed to fade as he said these words to me. In an instant, he was ripped from my grip, his body disappearing straight down beneath the surface. I didn't understand what was happening, but a feeling of absolute dread filled every ounce of my being. Shivering and exhausted, I let go of the life ring and plunged beneath the waters. I could see Damien, his descent deeply unnatural as he locked eyes with me. Just beyond his rapidly vanishing body, I saw something else as well. In the endless darkness below, I could see a shadow. Whatever it was, this creature was enormous, at least 50 metres across. This thing had Damien, and there was nothing I could do. I watched for a moment longer as he disappeared into the darkness below, his eyes locked on mine until he was gone, into the depths, forever. I don't think I've ever swam faster than I did that day as I made my way back to the vessel, my heart pounding, being pushed forward on adrenaline and instinct alone. The following weeks involved various inquiries and endless questions. The Coast Guard mounted several searches for a body, but nothing was ever recovered. I knew it wouldn't. Whatever had taken Damien would have made sure of that. I didn't even know what to tell people when they asked what happened. How do you explain something like that? Ultimately, it was put down to an unfortunate accident, just another soul lost to the terrifying might of our oceans. I was called a hero for what I did. They said I showed incredible bravery by going in after Damien and that I could have been killed. I didn't feel like a hero. I was a coward. I was so scared of what I saw on that morning, 90 miles from anywhere. I knew then that I would never go back out there. It had been said that we know more about the surface of our moon than we do about the bodies of water that surround our planet, and now I think I understand this. There are deep, untouched areas of our seas and oceans, and we have no idea what lives down there. What I do know is that there is something huge, filled with malice and with an evil, ancient intelligence that lurks in the dark depths of the Atlantic Ocean. I'll never go near the water again. I can't, and you shouldn't either. Well, I don't know about you, but that's done nothing to alleviate my fears of the endless depths out there. Literature is filled with stories of unknown creatures and bizarre happenings out in the waves. Maybe that's all they are, just tall tales to scare children, or maybe, just maybe, there are things out there that we just aren't ready to understand. I'll leave it to you to decide. Good night everyone, and thanks for listening.